we're really excited here today to catch up with Peter Pereira, who has accomplished a lot, and really pumped up to talk about the title today of photojournalism and things that he has accomplished. I want to make sure that everyone knows we're going to have opportunity for Q&A at the back. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can put them in the bottom in the Q&A section. You can type them out. You don't have to wait till the end. You can just keep them coming while we're kind of going through. And we'll make sure that we get all the questions answered at the very end of the presentation. Real quickly, want to introduce Peter, who is amazing and had a short time to get to know him, and really pumped up to have him here. He's an award-winning photographer and photojournalist. His work's been featured, everywhere. Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. He won the National Press Photographers Association New England Region Photographer of the Year 8 times. New England Newspaper and Press Association Photographer of the Year 11 times. Really has a great perspective. I think one of the most interesting things that I found was that he was an engineering graduate in '92 from our school. So very, very excited to have you here, Peter. And again, can't thank you enough, and I will pass it off to you.
How are you, Josh? Well, thank you so very much for inviting me to be part of the Corsair chat. As you said, I am actually a computer engineer. I graduated from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth in 1992. It was actually the first year that the university was called as such. As most of you know, it was actually called SMU just before that. And at the time, computer engineering was a little bit of a nascent state. And I'm still a total tech head. And it's funny because a lot of people ask me, like, what exactly does photojournalism have to do with computer engineering? And many people are quick to point out that, no, that has nothing to do. Well, they're very wrong on many aspects. Not only has photography in general moved from the 35 millimeter film format to what we have now, which is completely in the digital domain. So in essence, it's all computerized. But the big difference between photojournalism and any other type of photography is that photojournalists, we don't pose photos. We don't stage photos. We don't tell people what to do so we can photograph them. We document the world with our cameras. And the best way of doing that is basically to anticipate things. It's to look at patterns, look at what's happening, and see where things are going. And that's where my engineering background always plays out. And every single time I bring my camera up to my eye to take a photo, is that analytical approach to resolving what it is that I'm looking at as a problem. And that's what engineering is. The engineering is the ability to find a solution to a problem, or even a problem that possibly hasn't even happened yet. So that's the way I always approach my photography. And that's why a lot of times when you see some of the photographs I have taken, is that there's always strong foreground elements. There's, an interesting framing of the photos. And that's, I think, the concepts that was taught to me in engineering school, which is look at the world, not simply the obvious things, but take everything into account, a holistic approach to what is happening in front of you. And here we are in now 2021, but as we know, 2020 was one of the most interesting, for lack of a better word, years that any one of us can recall. There were great shifts in movements. And of course, we had the pandemic that literally just threw everything upside down over the last 12 months. As a photographer, when I switched careers back in 1998, and I decided, this was my calling, this is something I needed to do. I needed to document, the moments. In a visual context. And I wanted to do that because the beauty of photography is that it's basically a universal language. You don't need a translator. You can look at a photograph and you can be moved, and you can read a story, you can look at it and deduce what it is that you're taking from it. But it never during the when I switched careers, I never thought that I would be living through basically an entire year that is going to go down in history as an event. You know, we all read our history books, and if you can see behind me, I have an affinity for ancient Egypt. I've been fortunate enough to have been to Egypt on 2 occasions. And you read about these events, in this case, pharaohs or your historical events, but you never actually think that what you're living through is someday going to be part of the history books. And that is one of the beauties of photojournalism, is that even when there is nothing, you know, pandemic sized happening, every photograph that you take, that I take, that anyone takes, it could be with their phone, it could be with their DSLR, is actually a historical record of our time. It's a slice of what was happening the moment that you took the photograph. And the big difference between photojournalism and most other types of photography is the tenets of the ethics that a photojournalist operates under gives the viewer, hopefully, the concept that what they're looking at is simply a document, a visual record of what was happening. So, of course, the question is, what exactly did I work on over the course of the last 12 months that have been historical for all the ways that I've outlined? So let me share my screen, and then I can show you some of my work. There was obviously the pandemic is what literally the first thing that happened. And right when the pandemic happened, one of the bodies of work that I've been working on for a long period of time is documenting the human condition. And I've traveled overseas to many different countries doing projects on poverty. It could be Haiti, it could be India, it could be Guatemala, Honduras, whatever. And that was one of the first things that struck me is how are the homeless people, how are the people that are living under extreme conditions dealing with this pandemic? So one thing led to another, and I ended up at a homeless shelter. And what they decided to do, because at the time there really wasn't much idea of how the pandemic was progressing and so on, so they decided to lock themselves into this house. So for months on end, nobody could leave, nobody could come in. This entire community would lock themselves in, and the only thing in and out were the food donations that happened every day. So this was the first big photo essay that I shot to document the living conditions and the efforts that these people were taking to try to cope with what at the time was something that really not many people were really quite sure of how to deal with this pandemic. As you can see, I decided to shoot it in black and white because, again, the beauty of black and white is that it's not about the color, it's not about the saturation, it's about the starkness of the event. It's about letting the photograph speak in an emotional, connect with you in an emotional sense. And let me tell you, it was hard to photograph this because at the time, I was really literally the only person that they let into this thing. And I had like 5 masks on, I had like gloves, I had the whole 9 yards. And yet, as I'm walking through the facility, that was the only thing that I could think of is like, I wasn't thinking that like, okay, maybe they'll infect me. I was thinking that I could possibly infect them. And you know, something that is really something that's always back in the back of my mind is how is my photography impacting not just the community in general, but how is my photography impacting the people that I'm photographing? Then the other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to really get inside the hospitals because they were really closed off and they were like castles, and no hospital is going to let you photograph, especially when the pandemic is still, you know, a variable that not many people still knew what was going to happen. Unbelievably, maybe because the long relationship that I've had with St. Luke's Hospital, the South Coast Health Group agreed to let me photograph. I spent the entire day at 1 day per hospital. So St. Luke's Hospital, Charlton Hospital, and Toby Hospital. And the incredible part was, at no point were they telling me what to photograph. I had complete transparency. I did whatever I wanted. I walked through the entire hospital and I just photographed. And I wanted to get the sense of, what are these frontline workers going through? How difficult must it be for these people to exist in what at the time, again, it's not like today where we have a vaccine and we know a plan on how the pandemic is affecting people. When I photographed this was back in June, I think, there was still uncertainty as to the infection rates and so on, and how deadly the disease was. But if you can look at the power of photojournalism is to bring you, the viewer, and put you in my shoes. It doesn't matter that you acknowledge that I or anyone else took a photograph, but the idea is to put you in a place that you wouldn't have access to. And the only way to do that is to get up close and personal. And that only comes with, great relationships, a strong portfolio of work, and ultimately it comes to trust. Because the hospital knew that I was going in there with full transparency. So once I'm in, I'm going to photograph everything that I see. But even working in those conditions, I still knew that I wasn't there to photograph patients so that you can identify who they were. There's a lot of things that you have to be cognizant of as a journalist. But it's funny because if you look at this photo here, if you look at like this photo here, this is the interesting thing, is I had not been inside the ICU wing for a long time. And I'm photographing this woman preparing this apparatus. And behind her, I actually shot these photos. This was actually a photo that I took in Honduras of a doctor at St. Luke's Hospital who was out there that I met, and he was doing free checks for these poor communities in Honduras. And to have them put something like that up, it means a lot to me, because it means that the work touched someone, even if it were the doctor and he wanted to show off what it is that he was doing. But that's the idea of photography. That's what this is all about, is having the opportunity of bringing you to a place that you don't have access to, but hopefully showing it in an interesting way that's captivating. And you can see, I spent a considerable amount of time at St. Luke's, and the same thing happened for the other two hospitals. Now, one of the other events that really was a defining moment in 2020 was also the Black Lives Matter movement. And I had the opportunity to photograph a few. Hold on a minute. I had the opportunity to photograph a few different Black Lives Matters protests. And let me show you some photos here. Again, these were defining moments, moments that defined this particular year. And while the Black Lives Matter protests in our area were peaceful, obviously, there were some throughout the country that were not as peaceful. But regardless of what it was, as a journalist, it's my responsibility to tell the full story. So if I were to see acts of violence, that's what happened. I need to document every aspect. And sometimes it's hard because you're right in the middle. And And some groups might think that you're the enemy because you're the media, or they might not agree with something that they read years ago in whatever publication you work for. So every time I go out, and I can say this for all other photojournalists as well, is you go out with no plan in mind outside of one simple fact. You want to document what it is that you see. And some of the moments that you see, it could be fires, it could be riots, it could be anything. They're moving and they're difficult. But you always go with the idea that you're going to come back with a body of work that is representative of what it is that you felt, what it is that you see. And there are many times where, I'm overcome by what it is that I see. And I feel emotions. And I think that's one of the strengths of my work is, I go in there with an open mind. I have no agenda whatsoever besides the idea that I need to focus on doing the best job possible documenting an event. As you can see here, there was quite a few of these protests, and I tried to go out there every day or every time I saw someone on the streets and make photographs that are interesting, but also that are, records of what it is that happened in 2020 in downtown New Bedford in this case. Besides the obvious two things, I mean, we had a year that is, I mean, photographically, every day is interesting, but I can assure you. So let me show you my favorite photos that I shot this year. You might have seen some of these from the other two that I just showed you, but there's a lot of diversity in what it is that photojournalism, the type of photography that I do. Like you've seen these two photos, but give it a couple of seconds. And I mean, the world doesn't stop because we have a pandemic, because actually that was shot at UMass Dartmouth when they were setting up the temporary facility for cases of COVID, should they be required. But one of the things that I take a lot of pride in is to really understand where it is that I live. Okay, understand what is New Bedford, what is Dartmouth, who lives in Mattapoisett, what is Marion, and the only way to do that is to become really active in the community, to walk in the community, to feel what is happening around us, but also literally to just, let me just fast forward this, to just experience our community as a citizen, but not just as a journalist, and that's really important. A lot of the problems that we see now, as far as the media is concerned, is that in general there's less and less resources that newspapers and media outlets can collect through advertising, through print media, and so on, to have enough resources to document things as well as possible. And the irony, of course, is that we're living through a time that you can make a strong case we've never needed local news or news in general as much as we do now. We're all connected, but there's a big difference between someone putting an opinion on social media and having a journalist research something. There's a big difference. And hopefully, in the near future, I think there needs to be some change on the importance of local media and how much the work that journalists, not just photographers, but reporters do, and how much impact that can have on the community. And this, by the way, is actually the very first photo that I shot. Not this gentleman dancing. This was the first photo that I shot when the pandemic became a real thing. This was shot on March 16th, and you can see that the shelves on the right that had toilet paper and paper goods are already completely empty. You would never think that this was something that we'd live through, right? But again, I take a lot of pride in being out there, discovering things. Almost everything that you see in these photos is simply me out there discovering and trying to be part of our of my community, but creating a visual record that someday, long in the future, someone can look back and say, "Wow, that's what New Bedford was like. That's what Mattapoisett was like, or that's what India was like back when this guy took the photos." But we all have the power to do that. Every single time we take a photo with our cell phones and we put it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever the case might be, we become active participants in documenting our time. And that's ultimately what photojournalism is. The only big difference is we operate under specific rules, like I've mentioned a couple of times. And that is simply to document an event with no interaction with it. And I know that some of you have some questions, and I definitely want to get to those. So if you want to ask Josh some questions, I'm sure he's going to pass those on to me. But what you see here is some of my favorite photos that I took in 2020. I've had quite a large body of work that even in 2020 was published in some of the biggest publications, including the New York Times and so on. But every single day is a challenge. I love my job. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it's awesome to know that, as a photographer, I can go out there and I can enlighten people. I can show them something like that. I could put a smile on your face too. It doesn't have to be depressing all the time. And believe me, I've seen some depressing things as a journalist. And I wouldn't change those moments for anything. So I'm going to shut off my screen sharing here. And I know that Josh might have a couple of questions for me. So
first off, that was great. And there was a lot of smiling going on there. That was awesome. And a lot of the comments are just how phenomenal it is. Looks like you caught a couple of the attendees in a couple photos in New Bedford, which is pretty cool. So that's exciting. One of the questions that we have is, how do you prepare yourself before a story? Do you have a process that you go through?
For any story?
Yeah. When you're starting a story.
I mean, one of the things that I do a lot of talks with young journalists or young photojournalists to be, and one of the things I always tell them is simple. And I touched on this during the talk that I just gave, is keep an open mind. The moment you go into something, you're like, oh, I'm going to take a photo of this or that, you're actually missing what's probably more interesting. So when I go into something, I'll give you an example right now. The Dartmouth Mass Vaccination Center opened just a few hours ago, and I was there. Now, they didn't let me go in when it actually opened at noon, so I couldn't take photographs of people getting vaccinated. But they let me walk around, whatever. So again, if I had gone in and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to take a shot of John Smith getting a vaccine, then I would have missed everything, because then I couldn't have taken a photo of that. I always try to go in with an open mind, only with one goal in mind: to show it in my style, whatever that is. Show it in a way that I'm proud to put my name under it. But there's really never an agenda when I go in. I try to keep as open mind as possible.
That's great. That's great. Do you have a favorite story?
Do I have a favorite story? Oh, man.
That's a loaded question.
Okay, I'll tell you guys, the most incredible photo I ever took was actually the very first photo I ever had published in my life, unbeknownst to me. Yeah. So when I made the decision in '98 to switch careers, nobody would give me a shot because my portfolio, quite frankly, was terrible. But that's a story for another time. But I kept on plugging at it. I'm like, I'm going to do this. So I saw a tall ship coming in. This is in 1998 into New Bedford Harbor. was early in the morning. I took some shots after it docked. I talked them into letting me climb the mast because they were up there furling the sails. It turns out, I know you guys are going to think this is completely insane, but it's very true. It turns out that this tall ship called the Gazella was actually Portuguese at one point. But here's the most incredible thing. Yeah, this ship rescued both my grandfathers when their schooner sank. They were best friends before my mom was even born. Their ship sank after hitting an iceberg, and this, the Gazella, rescued them.
That's amazing.
You can't get any better than that. Sorry, I got a little bit emotional, but without that shot, I would have never gotten to where I am today, because that was the very first shot that I got published. And without that ship, I wouldn't even be here.
That is incredible. That's incredible. We have a question. Besides photography or photojournalism, what else do you enjoy doing?
I actually race bicycles. Yes, I've been a race for real. I'm actually USA Cycling. I have my racing license. I started racing actually when I was at UMass Dartmouth. A good friend of mine who we still race together, George Fernandez, who also went to UMass Dartmouth, and I hope he's on the chat now. We actually raced together for the Jaguars powered by Domino's racing team. So to answer your question, every time you go out there and you see some guys on the bike and they have Jaguar, like the car, written on their shorts and Domino's Pizza on their back, that's either George or I. So there's your question.
That's great. George teed that up. That's who asked the question. So that's
awesome. Really? I cannot tell who asked the question, so that was pretty loaded on his part.
No, it's all good. It's funny because Ben asked, do you keep a camera with you when you bicycle? And if so, what's your go-to?
Oh, man, do I keep a camera when I bike? Actually, we all have cell phones, right? Therein lies the seismic shift in how photography is perceived. Up until the smartphone camera was good enough about 5-6 years ago, you went out and you bought a DSLR, right? You bought a big camera, which is what I still use. But the beauty of having a smartphone is the concept that the camera is so good you can actually photograph it. And a lot of times, I've actually, a few years ago, there was a major hurricane. Okay, both my large cameras, my DSLRs, got waterlogged, which means they were not working. I pulled out my Galaxy S10 or whatever it was, it was back S5. And I shot photos of a yacht that had run aground in Mattapoisett. And that photo was all over the country. But nobody asked, hey, did you use a real camera or did you use a smartphone? So there's ways, the best camera is the one you have with you, I believe is what I'm trying to get at. And if you frame it and you take the time and you treat it not as a smartphone, but as a serious instrument to capture visually what you see in front of you, great things can be done with a smartphone.
That's incredible. Do you have a favorite photographer whose work you enjoy following?
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, even the whole time when I was in college, and I've always been a photography fan. I've always been a photojournalism fan. It wasn't like in '98 I decided, oh, let me try this. No. And James Nachtwey, who is like a legend in photojournalism, he is definitely my favorite photographer, like by a long shot. And I could honestly tell you that he had a huge impact on how I see the world in two-dimensional space, which is what a photograph is. At the time I bought all his books. He's a time photographer, and the guy's the way that he's able to capture the world with his cameras really had an impact on how I saw the potential of what could be done in terms of documentary photography. And if you guys want to see him in action in a video setting, quite a few years ago, there was a documentary called War Photographer. So if you have a chance, I believe it's on Netflix, check that out and you'll understand what I mean. Which, of course, perfect segue. If you want to see my videos, I have a behind the photo channel on YouTube. You guys can tune into that and you can see me actually photographing and you'll see how I take the photos.
And I can give the highest recommendation of that. We were talking before, not to steal it, but Peter had found a picture from what 100 years ago to the
Yeah,
day,
exactly 100 years. Yep.
and took another photo from the same exact spot. It's really it's worth a watch, and there's a lot of great content on there. Which leads us into a couple of questions where people are asking if there's a place to go to see your work and if it's available for purchase.
Okay, so the big, I'm not going to call it, I'm going to say the advantage and disadvantage of being a photojournalist is galleries are really not where photojournalists display their work. With that said, I had a major show at the Whaling Museum in 2016 with over 80 pieces. It was unbelievable. So if you guys want to check out my work, you got to go to my website. That's peterpereira.com. I post a photo of the day. So I'm going to just share a screen real quick, just so that you guys can see what I mean. So if you go to, okay, so if you go to peterpereira.com, which is this, okay, so this I shot in Guatemala. And if you click singles daily and then the year and then the month, you can see what my favorite photo. So here's Monday's photo of the day. Here's yesterday's photo of the day. I haven't posted one yet for today, but you get the point. And then if you click on documentary, you'll see all kinds of different photo essays that I've done over the years. My international work is here. I have a lot more that I haven't had the opportunity to put together. And if you click out there and you want to just check out my YouTube channel, I put some of my videos here as well.
That's amazing. Thank you. Trying to go through these. Do you ever work with 35 millimeter film, or do you stick to strictly digital?
Okay, so when I started in this, we actually were still shooting film. I was actually one of the first to shoot, to do photojournalism with a digital camera, because at the time, most newspapers were still not ready for the digital domain. So we had a darkroom and so on. But I'll tell you, the last piece I actually did using film was I shot a book I thought I had one over there, but I don't. I did a book on the Franciscan friars, and I shot it all on black and white film. Unbelievably, I lost over 30 rolls of film because this was so long after we stopped using film that people at the Standard Times would walk by, hear the machine, the developer going, and think there was something wrong and shut off the switch. So I lost over 30 rolls, and I promised myself I am never, ever doing that again. However, I do love the feel of film. I love the texture of the way that the film comes through. It's just, as a journalist, it's difficult because it's so expensive now. I mean, now I can take 600 photos in a day. You divide that by 36, that's a lot of rolls of film, and never mind the processing fees. So I wish I could do more, but not right now.
No, well said. The question is, at UMass D, did you ever take any photography classes? And if so, how did your UMass D experience help you to where you are now as a photographer?
Yeah, I mean, I never took any photo classes because at the time I loved photography and I did take photos just as a hobby. But I was very focused on computer engineering, on the technology side. As, by the way, as I still am, I'm total geek at heart. I still have a home server. I still code stuff. You never lose that. But one of the things, and this is what I alluded to at the beginning of my talk, is the advantage of being engineer is you don't see the world as different quanta, as different snapshots, no pun intended. You see it as if this, then that. Everything is if this, then that, which is what engineering is. So if I sit here and I wait for that person to walk across like that, eventually that person's going to be right between that two guys' eyeballs like that. And if I use a lens big enough, then it can look like a Godzilla man with a little guy in the back. See, that's what engineering does, is it forces you to think of the world as cause and effect. So that's the way I approach my photography every single day. Every day, it's okay. What is going to happen if I'm here or there? If I crouch up, if I go up in the air, and that's how I get most of my interesting photos.
That's great. What piqued your interest in Egyptian history?
Okay, so I don't know if maybe I'm a little bit older. I don't know. I'm 50 years old, but at the time when I was in elementary school, there was such a thing as the bookmobile, which is basically a rolling library in the back of a bus. And I wanted to be the kid. This is probably fifth grade with the biggest book, right? So I go into the bookmobile and all my classmates came out with these little books. So I looked at the bottom shelf and I pulled out this ginormous book, and it was about ancient Egypt. And ever since I opened that book, all the way back then, I was just fascinated with the culture and different things. And like I said, I've been to Egypt twice. I have two kids that I named after pharaohs and queens. And I'm actually in the process of trying to get back to Egypt this year for a piece. There's a lot of discoveries at Saqqara, and there's a new Grand Museum opening in Cairo. So hopefully I'll go back there again.
That's great. This one is, with everyone having a camera now, is it hard for someone to get started as a professional photojournalist?
Actually, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that because everybody's taking photos, which is great, there is a lot of noise, whatever that means. Okay. Noise being in that there's so much material that for you to stand out, it's got to be really good. Okay. But the big advantage as of now from 1998 is now we're all connected. So if you are pretty good and you try really hard, the world is right there. It's an email away. All you have to do is make sure that you're sharing your work, that you're passionate about what you do. And let me tell you something. I live by this every single day. You are going to be judged not by your best photo. You're going to be judged by your worst photo. So make sure that every single photo you attach your name to is awesome. And if you do that, you will succeed, because the simple truth is most of the population is happy being good enough. And I'm talking not just in photography, I'm talking in general. And if you try really hard and everything matters and everything that you do is with a purpose in achieving that goal, if being a photojournalist is that, then you go out there. Don't take no for an answer. When editors told me that, oh, nah, we're all set. We don't need any stringers. We don't need any freelancers. We don't need anything. Imagine if I had said, okay, I accept that. Imagine if I had never gone to photograph that tall ship. But when the tall ship came, imagine if I've never talked my way up to climb the mast, which no other photographer would have done, shot straight down, which forced the editors to look at it because it's something that they would have never done. That was the beginning. So if you approach it that way, seriously, the world is your oyster. Anything is possible.
That's great advice. So we'll start wrapping up soon. I know we have a couple more. I think you kind of answered it, but what things do you take into consideration and find crucial when processing your images?
Yeah, I mean, processing, what is processing? So processing is a selection of the photos, and you narrow that down to a specific set of photos, and then you run them through an image processor. So like Photoshop, whatever. I actually have an endorsement deal with AC/DC, which I've been using for years. It's a great product, but I use it because of the simplicity. The big difference between photojournalism and every other type of photography is we're not manipulating the image. We're not adding or subtracting things. The only thing we're really doing is we might adjust the contrast, we might adjust the sharpness, and we'll maybe do a crop, and that's about it. So when it comes to processing my images, I try to do it as quickly as possible because, well, hopefully I would have taken a good photo to begin with so that there's no processing required at all. So it might just be a little bit of a crop and a little bit of a contrast, maybe a little bit of a color adjustment, and that's about it. So not much at all.
That's great. Yeah, I think this was amazing. Thank you again, Peter. This was awesome. I know you. It seems like from the other chats you have a huge following, and people are very thankful for you for it says capturing life and the beauty, especially in New Bedford, being a local person, capturing the local area. There's a lot of things in this chat that I can't share all of them because we'd be here forever. But the UMass D community and all of us are very proud of you and happy for what you do, and thank you for sharing that with us today.
Josh, I really can't thank you enough. I mean, I'm still a huge fan of UMass Dartmouth. I think what the university brings to the table is second to none. I think the value of education as a journalist, there are no doors. There's no nothing that I can't walk through. And I have, for the last 20 years as a journalist, I've photographed many times at UMass Dartmouth. Again, with full transparency. And I can honestly tell you, I photographed at many other universities as well. Okay. And UMass Dartmouth is second to none on so many areas. Nothing has really changed in the sense that the engineering department still love the place. And to have the opportunity of doing something like this and reconnecting with my alma mater, even if it's not as an engineer, it's still very special to me. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming and sharing this experience with us. Stay safe, and best wishes to all.